Council is in session and call to order a meeting of the Board of Directors of the TIRZ Board. And first item is the TIRZ Board.
Good evening, TIRZ Board. So this is the annual, this is the time of year where we're going to look at the annual report. And our consultants, David Pettit, Economic Development, prepared the report for us. And this is a requirement under Chapter 311, 016 of the Texas Tax Code. And I've laid out, all the requirements on the agenda report, and it's also laid out in the actual report itself.
Sherry, I didn't bring my physical copy. Do you happen to have an extra one? Sorry.
Yes.
I could probably find it in my emails. I know, it's in the emails. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. And so as y'all recall, you created a TIRZ that consisted of 477 acre of continuous acreage, and it's known as TIRZ number 1, and it bounds Haskell Avenue to the northwest, Guadalupe River to the west, Travis Street to the south, and Barnett and Aranza Streets to the east. And during this past year, the actual original value when y'all created the TIRZ as of January 1st of 2018 was $97,488,489. And then at a tax rate of, and the tax rate back then was 55.14. And over the course of a year, the value in the TIRZ has gone up to $103,782,388, which is a captured appraised value in the TIRZ of $5,823,621. And the city's portion that would come this next year in 2020, nothing is in the TIRZ fund right now. It's going to be collected over this year, and that value will fluctuate as they look at the tax rolls and if they have any protest and what they actually determine the value to be that year. But the consultants are estimating that there'll be an amount of $33,987 in the TIRZ fund after the collections this year. And so with that said, the legislation only requires that y'all receive the annual report. It does not require any further action. And then this annual report will be submitted to the comptroller's office by Amy as the finance director for the city and the TIRZ. Do y'all have any questions?
I had a question that Mark answered actually in our meeting, which was this because of one property's value that went up drastically, or a multiple of properties, and it was a multiple?
It would be a multiple. And what Natalie did with David Pettit, Economic Development, is she contacted Sharon and at the appraisal district.
Mm-hmm.
And what they had done when the TIRZ was created is they actually put a tag on the accounts, just like they would any taxing jurisdiction. So they were able to pull those reports pretty easily.
Okay.
And so there may be a few properties that brought that amount up, but it was an across the board situation.
Just curious if there was one that stood out. So
not that I'm aware of.
Thank you.
So, And so that is the end of the annual report presentation, unless y'all have questions other than.
Okay, are there comments or questions?
I move that we accept the TIRZ report as presented. Are we ready?
Oh, and you don't need to take.
Oh, we don't
Yeah.
have to do
You
that?
just have to
Oh,
receive it.
just
So-
receive it, okay, okay,
So your next item on the agenda would be
oh, okay.
Okay.
for you to approve the minutes.
At 4:05, I adjourn the meeting of the TIRZ Board.
Mayor, you have the minutes that we need to adopt as well.
Oh, okay, thank you. Minutes, do we have a motion on the minutes?
I will make a motion that we accept the minutes as presented for the TIRZ.
Second.
And can I ask a clarification question? Just point of order. If we weren't on council, we still need to approve those, is that correct? With 2018?
Yes.
All right. Okay. All in favor by the raised hands? Okay. And it passes unanimously. All right, now, still 4:05, and we adjourn the meeting of the TIRZ Board, and we will move to the Kerrville City Council workshop. Chief?
Good afternoon. Here to present some information regarding sex offender registration requirements within the city limits of Kerrville. This is information that we put together in order to give you some information to utilize after it was brought up at the last city council meeting regarding the potential of creating a city ordinance regarding sex offender registration. So I wanted to start off by talking a little bit about what a sex offender actually is. Sex offender is anyone who's convicted or adjudicated having committed a specific criminal offense or offenses usually of a sexual nature against another person. That's regardless of age of the offender, age of the victim. How often must a sex offender report to law enforcement? There are two lengths of registration requirements as to when a sex offender must register and report to law enforcement, and the lengths of time. So the two lengths of time for those registration requirements is there's a lifetime registration for some offenders. This lifetime registration requires an offender to register either once a year, every 90 days, or every 30 days. One of those three categories. The other is what's referred to as a post-10 registration requirement. It requires that the offender register once a year, every 90 days or every 30 days, for 10 years after the date of their discharge for supervision, the date of their offense, to continue registering as a sex offender. So when they're discharged from supervision, they register for 10 years in one of those categories, either once a year, every 90 days, or every 30 days, quarterly, or 30 days. So the verification requirements are annually, quarterly, or every 30 days. In annual verification, this offender will make an appointment and come to the police department once a year to verify all of their information. So these are generally, well, in every circumstance on the annual registration and verification, this occurs on their date of birth annually. Quarterly verification, if they are deemed a quarterly verification offender, has been convicted of 2 or more sexually violent offenses, and will have to come to the police department every 90 days or quarterly to verify all of their information. Monthly verification, this offender is generally homeless, and due to their lack of an address, they must come to the police department every 30 days to provide a description of the general area where they can be found. Once this offender maintains a residence in the city limits, then they will transfer over to register annually or quarterly, and they'll fall under the same requirements. When they come in to do their registration and verification, they come directly to the police department. Our officers meet with them one-on-one. And when I say officers, I'm talking about investigators with our reactive criminal investigations unit, the detectives upstairs. They're all split up amongst those detectives. I'm sorry.
Situation?
Yes. So what is the sex offender registry? So Texas Code of Criminal Procedure sets this up. DPS establishes the sex offender registry. It's a website. It has a website as the official internet public access for information to the DPS sex offender registration computerized central database of all sex offenders registered in Texas. All information provided through this website is open record. It may be used by anyone for any purpose. So any citizen can access this website, pull up the sex offender registration information for their area, view it on a map, and it provides them with specific information on this website. And this is anywhere in the state. If you have a location, a city, or if you have a specific individual, you can search the database on those parameters. So what information is on this registry? The full name of the offender is on that registry, their state identification number or their SID number, and their assigned risk level. It's either going to be high, medium, or low. A risk level is determined by screening that is actually conducted either by PDCJ at the prison system or through probation after the offender is sentenced. The risk level is designed as an indicator of possible likelihood that the offender is going to become a recidivist, that he's going to reoffend. He or she is going to reoffend. The test to determine this risk level is under constant development. It changes fairly regularly as new research studies and specifics of recidivism is revealed. As of December 16th of 2019, locally, Kerrville Police Department handles 1 high-risk offender, 21 moderate-risk offenders, and 19 low-risk offenders, for a total of 51 that we have within the city limits. There are 10 unknown risk offenders, and these offenders normally move to Texas from out of the state. And the reason that they are unknown risk is that they have not been categorized into either high, medium, or low. And the reason for that is either their offense and their release happened before this testing process started taking place. That's really the big reason for it. Or they're from out of state where they don't administer this test. So the information that's on the sex offender registry as part of the verification requirement. As of December 16th, 2019, this past month, we had 40 sex offenders that have annual verifications. They must verify all of their information annually with us. These registrants are required to report to the Kerrville Police Department on their birth date of each year. If they fail to do that, and they're in the area, and they exceed 7 days, then we can file on them. We go hunt them down, and we file on them for failure to comply with sex offender registration requirements, and we drop a warrant on them. 11 sex offenders have quarterly verifications. These registrants are required to report to the police department every 30 days. This is generally,
That's actually every 90 days, isn't it?
in this case, it's every 30 days.
But 11,
Quarterly.
they have quarterly.
I'm sorry, you're correct. You're correct.
It's just a
I've got a
typo.
typo here.
Yeah,
It's every
that's-
90
I
days.
yeah.
So these are individuals that generally have more than one violent offense, what's deemed as a violent offense in their background. If the sex offender has any change of status, they are required to report this change of status to the police department. So if they leave from where they have reported their residence to be, and they move to another location, they have to notify us. They have to notify us within 7 days of where that is, and we have to go through and change their registration. The data that's on the Texas DPS registration website is pushed from the local departments. We don't receive the listing from them, although we do access a listing for them on an audit basis. We will go in, pull that data, and we'll compare it to ours to make sure that we're accurate and that we don't have any issues with individuals that have dropped off the radar or anything of that nature. Okay, so what information is on the sex offender registry? The ending registration date is on there. You can access this from the website. This is what the DPS pushes out to the public face of this website. Ending registration date what the gender is of the offender, race and ethnicity, height, weight, hair color, eye color, shoe size, shoe width, birth dates, addresses, and the offense, including the statute, victim gender, victim age, disposition date, and the judgment on that. All that information is accessible on that website. Also, a photograph is there of each one of these individuals. So what's not on the public sex offender registry for view by the general public? Social security number, driver's license number, place of birth, county of offense, telephone number, vehicle information, employment information, next of kin information, and social media information. Although all of this information is reported to us, the local law enforcement agency, with jurisdiction over that offender, and
Do
is
you-
required to be provided.
I'm just curious why the county of offense is not public. Do you know why that I can understand the other ones. It's just a curiosity question.
Because they have information about who the offender is by name. You can, if you knew the county
You could
where this
look up
occurred,
there. You can.
you could backtrack and
Okay.
find the victim. That's really the main
Protect the
issue.
victim, okay.
So what restrictions can law enforcement place on sex offenders? Well, by law, these restrictions are dependent on the offense committed and the date of the conviction. But these restrictions ensure that the offender cannot either operate or offer to operate a bus, can't be a bus driver, provide or offer to provide a taxi cab or limousine service, transportation service. You can't provide any service in the residence of another person unless the provision of service will be supervised. Operate or offer to operate any amusement ride. And you cannot live on campus of a higher education facility unless you're authorized to do so by that institution. So what might this mean to you? As of December of 2019, the Kerrville Police Department has 51 active registered sex offenders living within the city limits of Kerrville, and this number can change. It's dependent on the transitory nature of some individuals. They move in, so there is a change there. Now, over the past 5 years, I can tell you that the average in terms of what offenders we have here within the city limits of Kerrville ranges anywhere from 40 to a high of 60. You know, generally, we're right in the median of around 50 within the city limits. Currently, as of this date, mid-December, 40 of those were annual verifications, and 11 are quarterly verifications. And as of December 16th, there are a total of 134 active sex offenders residing within Kirk County. So 51 of those are within the city limits. I know that you were provided some information by the city regarding city legal regarding the types of ordinances that can be availed of by home rule cities. Those really generate and they coalesce around the ability of those cities to provide for child safety zones that are restricting access in terms of distance from schools, arcades, park services, any place where children would congregate. That's what most of these ordinances do. There are I think in the survey, there are 64 within the state out of the 1,220 different communities. We have some within our region. Fredericksburg has an ordinance very similar to this, restricting registered sex offender distances from parks and various locations where children congregate, and creating those child safety zones. So there's a question about what actually occurs when we encounter these individuals and what we do to safeguard the community. We keep an internal list. We have our sex offenders on that list. That list is what we utilize to push information to the DPS website. We will pull their information from DPS and audit and balance against that to make sure that we are doing what we should be doing. So this process is really triggered immediately when a sex offender moves into our area and we are able to identify them. They know when they're released that they have to report to the local law enforcement agency in the area in which they reside. So if they are in violation of that, if they break that 7-day window, or we come across them in the community and we identify them as a registered sex offender, because it's going to show up on their record. So when we run them, it'll pull up registered sex offender, and we start making that inquiry upon that time. So we will either A, determine that they have moved here and they have recently moved here and they are going to come to register, or B, that they've been here for a while, they may have set up residency and they're in violation, and then we handle that situation by filing on them. We will also contact the agency for which they actually registered. So say, for instance, they actually originally came from Corpus Christi, and they have absconded, if you would, and come here and set up residence. We will notify that agency as well, but we will be proactive and go forward and take necessary steps to file the charges for the failure to comply with registration information.
Chief, since there's so many more out in the county versus inside city limits from your numbers here, you might talk a little bit about how you might coordinate with the county and keep tabs on where people are. Well,
Actually, the county does exactly the same thing that we do. So the process is virtually identical. They do the registration process for everybody in the county, and it's a monitoring process. It's not a punitive process. This is a monitoring process. So they keep track of their sex offenders, and we keep track of ours. Sometimes those paths cross. But it's a very rare occurrence when we have somebody move from the county into the city and then fail to come to the city and register promptly. It's not something that happens with regularity, but it's virtually the same process, whether it's the county registration or county verification process or our verification process. So the other question that has come up is there any interaction with the school system, the school district, when we come across a registered sex offender? We're required by law to notify the superintendent of the school district if we have a high-risk sex offender who's in our area, who's moved to our community, and we do that. The schools have the ability to deny access to sex offenders. If they are going to come onto the school campus, the KISD policy is that they're actually escorted from one location to the next. They have to have a bona fide reason to be there, and they have to have somebody to escort them on the campus. But we have one high-risk offender, and I will tell you that one high-risk offender was a federal detainee for child pornography, not for contact, but he is designated as a high-risk offender. And that's based on the TDCJ and the probation testing procedure for determining whether or not they have a high risk for reoffense or recidivism. So the website that you can go to, anybody can go to and look the information up on who's in your area. I've included here, it's a Texas DPS website. It's very user-friendly, and you're able to go in and actually view who's in your area and what the issues are. Now, I know that there was this is all predicated on, do we create a city ordinance where we create child safety zones. One of the things to keep in mind, and that's what you're considering with this information, one of the things to keep in mind is that although when you look at all of these offenders in the area, in our case 51, and you actually drill down and look at what their offenses are, many of them involve children. In fact, I would tell you that most of them involve children. What I would also tell you is that the victimology in these cases, as heinous as that offense is, the victimology in this cases indicates overwhelmingly that the victim was known to the offender. The offender was either a family member or was known to that child, had access to the child, and had the ability to, in many cases, groom those victims. So not the instance where you have an offense involving children, where you have an offender that was unknown to them, is extremely rare. The stranger danger moniker that we've utilized for a number of years, you know, it's really, when you look at victimology as a whole, not specifically always at this in this circumstance of child victims, but any type of victimology. When we look at it in the cases that we work, almost always the victim was known to the offender, and so it's something to keep in mind. I know that City Legal has given you information regarding some of the legal challenges that have recently come up in regards to ordinances of this nature. The ordinances that I've looked at, for instance, in Fredericksburg, the distance requirement is 1,500 feet. You know, they range anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500 feet. There are considerations to take into account with this ordinance.
Well, I would think that given that situation, when you create that distance, almost be like, I can envision it almost being like a reporting issue. So more of like someone that's in the area and perhaps sees something or knows someone or something unusual happens. I have a hard time understanding how that enforcement works on the proactive side.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, what we're referring to really, for the most part, is that distance restriction is in terms of residency. It applies to residency. So you're moving individuals
Gotcha.
into specific areas based on your distance that are outside of those child safety
It's
zones.
not the physical
It
personal
can be,
distance.
and the ability to go through the process of identifying that an offense has occurred becomes somewhat problematic. You are right. Now, as a part of the registration and verification requirements that we run, all of these offenders are required to provide us with vehicle information. That all of that information is accessible to our officers. If I were out on the street, I run a license plate, that license plate is linked to that individual, and it will come back as this is linked to an offender. And then, of course, you'd have to make the determination as to am I within this zone, or am I not within this zone? Is this individual traveling? Is the vehicle stopped? Are they loitering in one location? There are some issues that are problematic for enforcement.
So if we really were to actually, take this and consider it further, the easier or enforcement issue is really the residency.
Yes. And of course, the communities that have enacted these ordinances, there's also a grandfather clause in this. You have individuals that are registered sex offenders that are you can't remove them from the residence that they've established for years because an ordinance comes into effect. I would tell you
forward.
that we have offenders that are lifetime registrants, that We have one that's in an Alzheimer lockdown facility. Still got to register, still have to do the verification, or in assisted living centers. So it's,
Chief, a couple of things. One, is there anything you recommend to us to make, well, to make kids safer and others safer who might be victims? And the second is, how do you work with the parole officer who is assigned to sex offenders?
well, we work closely with probation and,
Probation,
but
yeah.
not really that closely with parole.
Yeah,
Because
yeah, probation.
there's a standoff there. But to answer your first question, the things that we can do to make our children safer, I would tell you that, again, the victimology shows that you either knew the offender, they were a family member, or somebody that was a family friend or had access. What we can do in that regard is to make that information more readily available to the public. What they can do, parents out there and individuals that deal with children should know that they need to make sure they know the individuals that have access to their children.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very unfortunate that a high percentage are family members or friends of the family that have access.
So the curriculum, like the DARE curriculum, and I don't know that the DARE curriculum is it being used anymore?
No, not locally.
I'm sure there's curriculum in this regard, but is it in our school system?
Our
Like through the, like for the
Observing.
education piece for kids.
I can't answer that question as to whether or
Okay.
not there's specific
So
curriculum
it's not
for this.
through your department if there is?
No.
That'd be a good question for the principals, though. Be curious if they have anything in place just to kind of remind teachers. I mean, not that they need reminding, but just have some type of something in place if you observe something, what's the next step, or,
Sure.
I mean, besides obvious things, which, reach out to your principal or your superior and describe your concern. I guess it's always a sensitive subject, though, because are you sure you think you know what you heard or saw or understood, and
Well, there's certain tells that you can pick up on, and you'll know if there's a child that is in need of some additional attention in terms of maybe the counseling system getting into contact and determining whether or not there is something going on. These children are groomed, and they're groomed by people that have access to them. And that's the bottom line of the issue.
But teachers do seem like they would be the most obvious to see or notice if they have the time. I mean, they're pretty busy doing a lot of things, but
The pencil.
as teachers, did you ever?
Yeah, we did. We had mandatory training, and we had, because we have requirements as teachers that if we, suspect that we have to follow some protocol and report to CPS and all of those things as well. So yes, there's that.
I figured there
that
was.
still
I mean,
exists,
I
sure,
wasn't a teacher, but
Sure.
Thanks, Chief.
yeah, thank you.
Curiosity question. Ages, do you have them broken down into ages?
The offenders,
No.
Perpetrators.
Perpetrators.
the actual offenders. No, I don't have a breakdown of their ages. It's easily accessible. It's on the site, but I didn't do a breakdown
okay.
of their
Yeah, I'm
offenders.
just
But
cures
like I
if-
said, it ranges from 96 years old, down to, below 18 years old.
City Secretary. I do have one question that indirectly relates to this, and my last question, I promise. So the question is, sorry, Gary signed as the city secretary, and it made me laugh, so I lost my train of thought. Do you already, what kind of difficulties do you have with the sex offenders and the reporting right now? Do you have a sense that of the known sex offenders that the police has the resources it needs to enforce and to regulate these as we are right now.
Yes, as we are right now. At this point in time, the 51, 40 to 60 registered sex offenders that enter the city or in the city are broken up amongst all of our investigative units. So, and they're pretty much an equal slice. We have one investigator who is the spear point, if you would, for making sure that he gets the initial intake and then assigns that to one of the investigators, himself included, and then they go through that process. So right now, we've got 5 investigators up there, and so those 50 are spread out amongst those 5. They do an excellent job of making that face-to-face contact. If there's any indication that they're violating their sex offender registry requirements, then we'll actively go out and look for them. You know, ideally, the first place that they end up going to is their place of employment. What you will find are occasionally, and this doesn't happen with regularity, for the most part, from what I've been notified by our investigations unit, they abide by the registration requirements because it's drilled into them from the moment that they're released. Those requirements are provided to them at their point of release, provided to them by probation, it's provided to them by the law enforcement agency that has direct control over them and does
If
the
they violate, they
verification
can go back to
process.
prison, right?
You know,
Yes.
ask if
Yeah,
they,
so
that's,
there's pretty
yeah.
good incentive for them to follow those
Absolutely.
rules.
So at this point in time, unless we just have a tremendous increase, we're well suited to be able to carry on with the registration process and the verification process as we sit right now.
You know, and I know we're gonna move on, but I know this is not in your purview, but my experience as a pastor and as a friend to people who have been sexually assaulted as children, that is so incredibly damaging. And it stays with somebody forever. I'm not gonna name any names, but I remember a high-profile individual in this community that had struggled with that for years of him being victimized, and then just fell into drugs and homelessness. And, you know, so I think somehow getting across how damaging this can be.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Any other comments or questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Okay. We're going to recess, and we hear a motion now in regard to the executive session.
I'll make a motion that we go into executive session under 551.071, 551.072, 87, those 3.
All right.
I'll second.
Got a second? All in favor, let me know by the raised hand. Okay. And we are adjourned to upstairs.